Hey everyone, today we're stepping into one of the most pivotal and dramatic battles of medieval history, the Battle of Poitiers, fought on September 19, 1356. This was a defining moment in the 100 Years' War between England and France, and trust me, it's packed with strategy, heroism, and a good dose of chaos. So, here's what went down. The English, led by Edward the Black Prince, were up against the French king, John the Good. Now Edward wasn't just any prince. This guy was a tactical genius. He had a weapon that had already proven itself a decade earlier at the Battle of Crécy, the longbow. Picture an army that could rain down armor-piercing arrows at a speed that left the enemy scrambling. It was game-changing. Edward didn't just rely on weapons, though. His defensive positioning on the battlefield gave his forces a serious edge. Meanwhile, the French leadership clung to old-school tactics, putting heavy cavalry at the center of their strategy, which played right into Edward's hands. And here's the kicker. When the dust settled, the English not only won the battle, but captured King John himself. Along with him, a host of French knights fell into English hands, and their ransoms became a treasure trove for the English treasury. This victory didn't just swell the coffers. It also allowed England to secure 25% of France under the Treaty of Bretagne a few years later. Talk about high stakes. The 100 Years' War itself was a long, messy affair that started in 1337, when Edward III of England decided he had a claim to the French throne through his mother. Naturally, the French weren't thrilled about this, and King Philip VI wasn't about to step aside. What followed was over a century of on-again, off-again conflict, with epic battles like Crécy and Poitiers marking turning points. By the time the Black Prince stepped onto the scene, his mission was clear: weaken the French economy and morale through a strategy known as chevauchée. This wasn't just war, it was scorched earth. Villages, towns, crops, everything in southwestern France was fair game. The goal? Leave the French reeling and force them to fight on Edward's terms. When the French finally took the bait, they brought their knights, infantry, and crossbowmen to the battlefield. But the English longbow was simply unmatched. These weren't ordinary bows, they were 6-foot powerhouses, capable of firing arrows that could pierce armor and do it fast. Compare that to the French crossbows, which were slower and less effective in the chaos of battle. To make matters worse for the French, their leadership was disorganized, and when it came time to make critical decisions, it all fell apart. Edward's forces, on the other hand, were disciplined and mobile. He even had mounted archers who could chase down retreating enemies or quickly respond where the fight was thickest. Meanwhile, the French cavalry, though impressive in their heavy armor, were sitting ducks against the relentless hail of arrows. It was a brutal lesson the French had already faced at Crécy, but somehow, they still hadn't found an answer to the longbow's dominance. And after tearing through southwest France, the Black Prince planned to unite with another English force coming down from Normandy. This second army, led by Henry of Grosmont, the Duke of Lancaster, had been wreaking similar havoc on the French countryside. But King John II of France, sensing the threat, strategically positioned his army near Chartres to block their union, forcing Edward to retreat back to Gascony. Things escalated quickly. The French army, moving fast, managed to catch the Black Prince's forces off guard near Poitiers on September 18, 1356. This army wasn't just English, it was a mix of English and Gascon troops. Before swords clashed, a papal envoy, Cardinal Talleyrand de Périgord, tried to broker peace between the two sides, but neither could settle on terms. Both armies used this brief pause to strengthen their positions. Edward dug trenches, built barricades with his supply wagons, and fortified his position, while John called in reinforcements to bolster his already larger force. Some of John's commanders suggested a cautious plan: surround the English and starve them out. But the French king, confident in his numerical advantage, opted for an all-out assault. This decision would prove disastrous. The battle kicked off early the next morning, just 4 miles from Poitiers. The battlefield itself was a mix of vineyards, woods, marshes, and hedges, terrain that heavily favored the defensive position Edward had chosen. The English, outnumbered significantly, some say nearly 7,000 to 35,000, were positioned on a small hill, shielded by natural obstacles. The French were forced to attack uphill in waves, their advantage in numbers shrinking with each charge. Despite their superior force, the French leadership fell into chaos. Their attacks lacked coordination, with commanders acting independently rather than as a unified force. English tactics, by contrast, were disciplined and methodical. The Black Prince split his troops into 3 divisions, 2 at the front and 1 at the rear for support. Using a mix of strategy and deception, they lured the French into reckless charges, including a feigned retreat that drew them into an ambush. Gascon forces flanked the French from behind, creating even more confusion. The English longbow once again dominated the battlefield. These 6-foot bows, wielded by skilled archers, fired armor-piercing arrows at an unmatched rate, cutting through the French ranks. To adapt to the challenging terrain, Edward had his knights fight on foot for better mobility. Even King John led his troops on foot, trying to rally his men, but an English cavalry reserve swept in at the critical moment, shattering French resistance. By midday, the French army was utterly defeated. Thousands of French soldiers lay dead, and around 2,000 knights were either killed or captured. Among the captives were some of France's most important nobles, including the Constable of France, 2 marshals, several counts, barons, and even John himself. The king surrendered to an English knight by handing over his right glove, a powerful symbol of submission in medieval chivalry. The ransom demanded for King John was staggering: 4 million gold écus, a sum so immense that he was temporarily released to raise the money while his son Louis was held hostage. When Louis escaped, John, true to the chivalric code, voluntarily returned to captivity. Meanwhile, the Black Prince gained widespread admiration for his treatment of King John, even personally serving him during the lavish banquets celebrating the English victory. The aftermath of Poitiers plunged France into chaos. With its king captured and many of its leaders dead or imprisoned, the country fell into disarray. French mercenaries, left unpaid and unchecked, began looting the countryside. Seizing the moment, Edward III of England attempted to press his claim to the French crown, but failed to capture Reims, the traditional coronation site for French kings. A harsh winter and dwindling resources forced him into peace talks, leading to the Treaty of Bretigny in 1360. Under this treaty, England gained 25% of French territory, while Edward gave up his claim to the French throne. Even with this treaty, the 100 Years' War was far from over. France, under the capable leadership of Charles V, began to recover lost territories. The Black Prince's health declined, and his death in 1376 marked the end of an era for English military dominance. Eventually, the war flared up again under Henry V, culminating in famous battles like Agincourt. But by the war's end in 1453, England had lost nearly all its French holdings except for Calais, setting the stage for a very different future for both nations.